Welcome to the IWillAim podcast. Our topic for today is thriving in chaos, spreading joy and happiness as you achieve the result you deserve. My guest for today is Kyle Jetson. The stress in Kyle Jetson's home was overwhelming. His marriage was on the brink of ending, and his relationship with his kids was strained beyond belief, as his entire family had lost faith in him as a husband, a father, and a leader. Then a memory popped into his mind that changed the way he viewed his situation and led to a top 1% happy marriage and family. He's now ready to share the simple yet powerful framework he created. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Will. It's great to be here. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Let me start with the first question. Can you share a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, so Will, I'm probably not unlike a lot of people listening to this who we all face challenges in our life. Some are big, some are small, but we all have these challenges we face. And I grew up in a kind of a tough neighborhood, and it made me a tough person. it it kind of put a chip on my shoulder, and I learned to kind of fight, and not so much physically, but there was that, but also just fight for everything I was trying to accomplish, and I think that really aimed me in a direction that long term was causing some problems for me in my as I grew older in my family and my relationship with my wife and kids. So I was molded in a certain way, and I'm not so sure that way was going to allow me to achieve the success that I deserved or that I wanted with my family and my life.
Well, thank you for sharing that the challenging journey, and yet you're here today. We get a lot of my audience will be learning from you, so I'm looking forward to that. I'll go first to a shout out section. Every episode I do dedicate it to someone. For this particular episode, I want to dedicate to a friend of mine named Scott Maselli. Scott Maselli has been a friend of mine for over 20 years. We've been working together on and off, and I really thank him for his support throughout my journey and really want to dedicate this episode to Scott. How about you, Kyle?
I want to shout out a real good buddy of mine named Cameron Watson. A couple of years ago, my wife of 30 years passed away suddenly. And, uh, people initially, when you have tragedy like that in your life, people will come and support you. But over time, they fade away, right? Because they have
Yep.
lives too. And it's obviously understandable. But this guy, Cameron Watson, has really stayed by my side and checked on me frequently. So I want to, and it's really been helpful for me to have conversations with him. So I want to shout out to him as well as my oldest son, Alec Jetzel, who I just realized this recently is my best friend. He's going to be 30 years old in about a week. So he's, an adult child of mine, but it's really great. And it's really nice when you can have somebody that is so close to you be such a great friend. So I want to shout out to him too.
That's really amazing and heartwarming, right? To have your children be your best friend at some point in your journey, because that is always a parent-child relationship. Thank you
Sure.
for doing that shout out. Let me go to the first question. Can you share a pivotal moment or experience that inspired you to change?
I can. There was you mentioned it in my in the opening that there was a time when I was young in my marriage. I had four sons at the time, and our marriage and my family was in trouble. My sons were they're what a lot of boys are, I think, and what I was as a boy, which is crazy and feral and wild animals, right? And I remember because I grew up tough, my approach to managing that was to use the threat, right, and use my
Mm,
masculinity to control those situations. And I remember my wife was very feminine and beautiful, and she was the picture of feminine beauty. And so there was some conflict between us and the way we were raising these boys. And obviously for her, she had never experienced these kind of crazy kids like this, and she was a little overwhelmed. And I thought I was doing the right thing by swooping in and putting the hammer down on these boys, right? Well, as this continued, I started to realize it was causing a lot of stress in our family. She wasn't crazy about the way I was handling it because she knew that she wanted to love them. I wanted to discipline them, right? And there's a balance there. And I didn't really understand that at that point, but I remember it was one Saturday morning. Uh, the boys woke up early and they were wild animals and it woke up the whole house. And I remember, it's one of those things where sometimes when you have problems with your kids or in your family, it can ruin your whole day. And I remember it kind of caused this argument between my wife and I early on that one Saturday morning. And my wife was very feminine and passive and kind and sweet, but I was the opposite. But I remember this morning, she was done with that. And we got into a really bad argument that went back and forth and it wasn't ending. And she was standing her ground on what she thought the problems were in her family. And we were in trouble. I mean, we really were in trouble. She wasn't happy with me. I wasn't happy with her. The kids were scared of me and they were, it was just it wasn't good. And I remember this argument kept going on, and I remember thinking this isn't going to stop and it's not going to get any better. So I remember grabbing my keys and going out on the front porch. And I remember just thinking, this isn't what I signed up for as a family. I had this dream of a family and this isn't it. And I had my keys in my pocket and I looked at my car and I thought, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm gone and this is not working. I'm done. And in that exact moment, I remember a thought crossed my mind of my father, a lesson my father had taught me when I was about 11 years old. And I was playing in a baseball game and there was two outs and all we needed is one out and we could win the game. Our team was ahead. Well, the kid on the other team hit the ball to me and I made an error. And the next few kids got hits and we ended up losing. They won. And it was all my fault. If I had just made that play, we would have won the game. And I remember I was just distraught. When you're 11 years old, that's your life, right? and events like that are just devastating. And I remember after the game, I went over to my dad and I said, you know what, Dad, I wish the ball hadn't been hit to me because then we could have won. And I remember my dad real clearly got down on my level and he said, you know what, Kyle, that's not the way we do things in life. If something is important to you, you don't ever want to go down without the biggest fight you can give. He said, you're not going to win every time, but don't you ever give up. Don't you ever pass the buck to anyone else. You take control. You prepare yourself. You work hard and you want every ball of every game hit to you. And in that moment, standing on that front porch, I realized I couldn't quit on my family. They were important to me and I couldn't pass the buck to anyone else. I couldn't blame my wife or my kids or anything. It was really my responsibility. And I remember, it kind of hitting me square between the eyes. So I did something else my father had taught me in that moment. And we had a big pecan tree in our front yard. We were living in Texas at the time. And I went under that pecan tree and I just knelt and just started praying. And I don't really remember how it went or what I said or any of those things, but I do remember feeling like God clearly said to me in that moment, your wife is not the problem and your kids are not the problem. The problem is you. Fix you. And I remember that I didn't want to hear that. It was tough to hear that. But in that moment, I thought, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. I can't change anybody else, but I can change myself. And so that became really the tipping point for me to really want to earn back the faith of my family. And one of the really funny things about the story is I walked inside and I went to my wife and I said, I'm not leaving and I'm going to fix this. And in that moment, she was still angry. And she said to me, good luck. And I knew in that moment she had lost faith in me as the leader of our family and as a husband. And I knew my job in that moment was to regain that trust. And so I just went to work and I became obsessed with becoming the father that my kids needed me to be. And I became obsessed with becoming the husband that my wife needed me to be. And that was really a pivotal moment in my life.
Wow, thank you for sharing that story. And it's really amazing how you have taken a challenging situation, and also like it's really amazing where a lesson you learned from your father when you were 11 years old came around and become a big moment in your life, right? And it truly shows that you're a great man because you take the challenge face on and you actually have worked on it to where you are today, right? I think you have a happy family, and truly it's really impressive. Thank you for sharing that story and your journey. You and your wife developed some framework that you use. Can you describe one of the framework? I think that it's called cost framework. How does it work?
You know what? I realized that as I faced challenges, I wasn't managing them very well. And I think this came from growing up in a tough situation, right? I had one way to face challenges, and that was through aggression and just, you know, beating the problem into submission, right? And I realized that was not going to be a long lasting. It was causing me problems, and so you know, I started to really study how big problems are solved, and there's some pretty clear patterns in how big giant problems are solved. I mean, going to the moon is imagine trying to figure that out. You've never been there. You really don't know what you get, but you want to figure out how to get there, number one, and number two, how to get back, right?
Mhm.
I mean, and there's all kinds of little intricacies in that problem, but there were some very clear patterns that started to come out when you solve big problems. And so as I started to think about it, I thought, how can I create a framework for every challenge I face? And just if it didn't matter what it was. And the framework that I initially came up with was what I call the cost framework. And the C in cost framework stands for challenge. What is the challenge? And so I would sit down and write out all the different details of the challenge, what it was costing me, how painful it was, how it was going to affect me long term or my kids or my wife. And I was trying to get leverage, right, by just
Mhm.
identifying in writing all the areas that the challenge was causing me. The O in cost is for the objective. I wanted to have a long term objective, not a short term, get it out of my way objective, but a long term objective. And so I would write out, what do I really want to learn or to have happen long term from this challenge? And most of the time it was me to handle it better, right? But it was also to teach others or to model behavior or those kind of things, right? The S in the cost formula is strategy. And what am I going to name this strategy? Because it's easy to fall back into our patterns. Even if we create a plan, when things happen, it's easy to fall back into our old patterns. And so I wanted to name my strategy something funny or unique or different so that it would pop into my mind when I saw that challenge again. And the T in cost is tactics. And the tactics are, what am I going to do first and second and third and fourth? And what I wanted to do was take the emotion out of facing this challenge, because when challenges hit us, we can get discouraged or frustrated or angry, and those emotions can make us make decisions that aren't always the best decisions, right? And so I thought, if I can lay out my tactics, what am I going to do first, second, third, fourth, and do it and remove the emotion and just follow that plan every time, I could be a better man as I face these challenges. And it's interesting because I would initially, it was just me, and I'll never forget the day that my wife caught me applying a cost strategy to a situation that was difficult. And she said to me, it was one morning, my kids were having some tricky times, and we were going to go to the park, but one of my sons was having a horrible morning, and he was argumentative and fighting with us. And I could see in my wife's face, we're not going to go to the park because the kids are already out of control. I don't want to deal with this. And I said, you know what, babe, I got it. And I ran upstairs and I worked with him for about 20 minutes. And I applied these tactics. And I came downstairs and I said, all right, everything's good. We're ready to go. And she said to me, you know what? That's not healthy. You're suppressing your anger, and I can tell. And you're going to blow up. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just following my pattern, my plan. I'm not angry. As a matter of fact, I feel great because I followed a plan and it worked. And I
Yeah.
was happy, right? And she
Yeah.
said, well, tell me what you're doing. And I remember that morning she allowed me to share with her my plan and how I applied that plan to that situation. We ended up going to the park and having a great day. And it was really kind of a tipping point in our relationship because she realized that I wasn't just playing it by ear all the time. If something happened, even with my wife, I would map out, what's the challenge, the C, what's the objective long term, what's the strategy. And I did it even with challenges with my wife. And she started watching me and seeing me become more composed and kinder and more loving during those heightened situations. And it really allowed her to join in and say, what are you doing? And she started creating her own cost formula framework for challenges she was facing. And it really changed the dynamics of my relationship with her. And then we started doing it together, right? When we would face things together as a couple and with our kids. And what a tremendous change that made, because then she bought in, and we were able to work together as a couple to raise those kids and give them everything they had. I have a bunch of strong-willed kids, and if you're not careful, they can get you. They can cause you some problems. But when we work together to address them together, it really brought us closer together. And facing challenges together can make you stronger as a couple and stronger as a family.
I love the way you set up your your cost framework, where you actually are looking at the problem and detaching the emotion out of it, right? I think I love that part, because like you said, emotion often make us make the wrong decision. In the spur moment, it's not the right decision. But the way you set up your cost framework, not only you document that you ponder and you put your thought on it, you're really going step by step and coming up with a plan that you could actually implement. And I love the fact that your wife was surprised that you were able to go up 20 minutes later, came back. And I do agree that the first logical thinking was you suppressed that emotion. But it's amazing that you were not really upset. You were even happy that it actually worked, right? And that actually, I think it's great. It's a pivotal moment where, like you mentioned, the dynamics in the family and change, and things have gone better and better over time. And I know that you have another framework. I think it's called good versus evil. Can you kind of like unpack that framework a little bit? Because I love the good and the evil concept.
So my wife was struggling for a while with we have one of our sons is more severe on the autism spectrum, and he is a challenge. Everything you've heard difficult with autism, that's him. He has no line he won't cross. He'll get frustrated and smash his head through glass windows. He has come at my wife and I with a knife before. So I mean, anything you can imagine being difficult, he is capable of that, and he's got some mental challenges. And so, it was tough raising him. And my wife found herself, uh, she was losing sleep at night because she was worried about his future and who's going to love him. If something happens to us, who's going to love him like we will, right? And I remember watching her start to slowly change, and I saw her get brighter and brighter and happier and happier. And one day I pulled her aside and said, "What is going on?" And she said, "You know what? I used the cost formula, and I created a strategy for myself for worry." And I thought, I've got to, well, tell me, I want to know, right? Because it was so, and what she had done, and it's interesting because since I talked to you last, Will, I went and found her notes.
Wow.
How great is that? This is her strategy. And the strategy is, she wrote down challenge, she wrote down objective, tactics, I'm sorry, strategy, and she called the strategy good versus evil. And what it was, I think our minds are, the devil's playground, right?
Yeah.
They really are.
Yeah.
And especially for, I noticed this especially for my wife. She would have these thoughts come into her mind, and she would start thinking about them, and they would spin her out of control. And she would be awake at night worried about it, or, things would happen and she would get discouraged or frustrated, and that would be the predominant thought. And that thought would grow. And we've all done it, right? We spin out of
Mm.
control
Yeah.
because we have these thoughts that cross our mind. And so, in a nutshell, and this is interesting because after my wife passed away, we used this same strategy as a family to face her passing. And how were we going to thrive as a family, me and my 6 kids? And she broke it down, and we actually created a little bitty document like this, right?
Wow.
But so we could print it and stick it on the mirrors in our houses, in the living room. All my kids have these in their cars. And really what it is we're going to have thoughts come into our minds.
Mm.
And if they lead us away from goodness, you know, eh, it's going to cause us problems, and they're going to spin. So what she would do, and I'll just read what she said. Her objective was to catch herself and replace bad thoughts with good thoughts. That was the objective. And her strategy was good versus evil. And she said, God wants me to be happy. The devil wants me to be miserable and ruin any chance at salvation. Make a list of emotions or thoughts that will lead me towards or away from goodness and catch myself and refocus on goodness. And what you have here is a list of emotions, of thoughts, right? On the good side, on the evil side is obsession,
Yep.
right? She would obsess over worry. And she wrote across from it calms. The opposite of obsess is calms. On one side is worry. The opposite of that is comfort. On one side is doubt. On the opposite side of that is creates belief.
Hmm.
On one side is discouragement. The other side is encouragement. And what she would do is try to catch herself in these difficult emotions. And she would catch herself and she would say, wait a minute, I'm running down this path. Let me just look at my little worksheet here and find out which emotion I can replace it with and focus on that. And what she did was in focusing on those good emotions that led her to goodness and catching those bad emotions, it brightened her. And she started focusing on the good. And she started, in her words, she said, I'm at my best for my kids because I'm having those emotions and chasing and focusing on those emotions that lead me to goodness and happiness and joy. And the really interesting thing that she said about this was, um, she said it's going to be hard either way. Raising kids, life is challenging. It's going to be hard.
Yep.
And she said, if you focus on and chase the good stuff, the lessons, what can we get from this? We can get frustrated, angry, discouraged, bitter, or we can get the good stuff. We can get lessons. We can get wisdom. We can get joy. We can face these things with courage and strength, and it can make us uplift us if we fight these challenges. If we are angry or discouraged or try to control other people, it's exhausting.
Yep.
And we find ourselves overwhelmed and exhausted. But if we face the same challenge with hope and joy and a plan, we're encouraged and we feel uplifted. And we can face the same challenges and it can uplift us as we manage those challenges well. And it's all based on good versus evil, right? Catch yourself in those negative emotions and determine what the opposite emotion is, an emotion that'll lead you towards goodness. And that is really, you got to focus on that. And it takes work, right?
Mm.
Because by default, we want to chase these difficulties, or we want to feel like victims by default. But all that does is lead us towards, right, away from our best selves. And so that's the strategy she came up with, the good versus evil strategy. Hopefully I described that in a way that people can understand.
You actually explained it really well. I think I love the framework because it helped you pivot from a bad situation to a good situation, right? And I love the part where it says, anger. If you what you're feeling right now is anger, what can you do about it, right? And I love that you're able to give yourself that opportunity to pivot
Yeah,
and move forward properly. Thank you for sharing that. It's an amazing, I would say, strategy, right? It came from the cost framework.
right.
So the next question I have is, what motivated you to pivot your view in this world? Because you were a bit, in a different perspective in the past, and you have pivoted, right? What motivated you to do that?
I think, I heard years ago, and this is something that really challenged me personally. I heard a movie producer, he was talking about creating movies. And he said something I'll never forget. He said the hero and the villain, they
Hmm.
both have the same backstory, right? He says the villain was treated unkindly and abused, and the world didn't treat him right as a kid, and he grew up, and the villain said, I was abused and treated unkindly as a kid, and I'm going to get the world back. I'm going to make the world pay, right?
Hmm.
He says the hero has the same backstory. He was treated unkindly. He was abused. He had faced these challenges that were overwhelming. And the hero says, the world was unkind to me, and I'm going to make sure nobody else has to deal with that. Right.
Wow.
I want to save everybody from that. Right. And when I heard that, I thought, am I the hero or am I the villain? Because I was fighting. I was angry. I had this chip on my shoulder. I was bitter. Right. Every challenge that came my way, I'm like, another challenge. Why do I have to face this? Right. And it made me bitter and angry. And I was pouring that out into the world. And I realized I was the villain. But if the hero has the same backstory as the villain, maybe I could change and try to become more like the hero, right? And create things and spread joy and happiness and show people, or in my own small little world, right? I could change it for me, and then maybe that would help change it. And I realized as I started doing this cost framework and started facing these hard things with the spirit of hope and love and kindness, it made me happier. And as it made me happier, people saw that. They saw my happiness, even through those challenges. And they said, "What are you doing?" Right? How? I had, after my wife passed away, people watched us, our family. And I had so many people come to me and say, "I don't know what you're doing, but I see the joy and happiness in you and your family. And I don't know how, because I couldn't do it." Right? If my wife,
Yeah.
and so, and I think what it is I realized not only we have a choice, we're all going to face challenges. We're going to face some hard stuff. And it can turn us bitter, and it's easy for that to happen. I know, right? But we have a choice, and we can decide to become the hero in our own lives and write our own story, right? In my story, I want to be the hero. I want to spread joy and happiness, and maybe just touch somebody else and let them know they can do it too, right? Because the world, I heard somebody one time say, uh, bitter, angry people live in a bitter, angry world.
Yes.
Happy, joyful people live in a happy, joyful world, and it's the same world. Right? What's the difference? We're all going to face challenges. The happy, joyful people, I promise you, have not gone through their life with no challenges.
True.
They have just decided to get the good stuff, to get wisdom and get courage and get strength and get hope as they face these challenges. And if we can all do that, right? If we can all face these challenges with hope and courage and strength, and create a plan, and even go through these challenges with a smile on our face, how powerful is that to spread that out into the world, as opposed to bitterness and anger? Because we see that every day. Bitter, angry people, they're everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're trying to get into our worlds, right?
Yes.
They don't like us being happy so much sometimes. So we
Yes.
have to,
True. True.
right? We have to face, people are tricky. So we have to face that as well. But how wonderful it is that if you face a challenge with somebody else and you're able to show them kindness and happiness and joy, even in those difficult moments, how powerful is that?
Well, thank you for sharing the hero villain concept, and thank you for being a hero, because my audience is learning a lot. Will be learning a lot from you, and the concept that you thought were really powerful. How you pivoted, to where you are today. How the work that you've done can spread joy, right? Which is the topic we're talking about.
Yeah.
You're striving in chaos and spreading joy, right, and achieving the result that you wanted. I hear that you talk about the word love, right? How do you ground on love as the key focus on your action? Because that's a bit like deeper, right? It's deeper.
Yeah.
It's
Well, the one thing that my wife and I determined is every strategy that we created, the first tactic had to be, we had to ask ourselves, how can I do this in a spirit of love?
mm,
Right? And it's really an interesting question, because, when your kids come at you and they're angry or frustrated, or, they've had enough. Sometimes your kids have had enough, or your spouse,
mm,
and you stop what you're doing and you say, "You know what? My natural pattern is to fight back, right? Or to
yeah,
defend myself." But if you ask yourself, how can I do this in a spirit of love? It changes the way you respond and approach different challenges, right? Sometimes challenges are all up here, our mind. And one of the things I think many of us do is we want to face challenge. We want to give other people love, but sometimes we don't necessarily give our own selves that same love and grace.
yes,
And so I think it's important for us to say, you know what? I'm facing a challenge. How can I be kind to myself as I face this challenge? How can I turn it on me and say, I need to quit being so hard on myself, or guilting myself or shaming myself for making mistakes, because we're all going to make them. And it's
mm,
part of our growth. How can I give myself grace? And when we do that in faith, and turn love towards ourselves, It allows us to love other people easier, right? Because we realize everybody else is making mistakes just like us. We're not perfect. They're not
Yep.
perfect. So the very first thing my wife and I started to do was anytime we wrote down a strategy, the number one tactic is ask yourself, how can I do this in a spirit of love? And it's hard to be angry or mean or right. It's hard to be anything other than kind when you put
Yep.
yourself in the spirit of love. And what a powerful thing that is to do. I mean, somebody can cut you off when you're driving to work, and it's kind of hard to scream at somebody in a spirit of love. Right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
how can I face this? Somebody cutting me off in traffic in a spirit of love. It changes you, and it changes the dynamics of how you approach things. And I think it's just, if that's one thing that anybody leaves here with, is anytime you face anything, is ask yourself, how can I do this in a spirit of love? And sometimes you can't, so you need to get gone for that moment, right? Until you can face it in a spirit of love.
Yep.
But a lot of that again is is making a plan and taking the emotion out of it, right? And then following that plan. So
I think it's amazing how you said, start with how do I make it with a spirit of love. I think I always compare this to our mind could only contain positive thoughts or negative thoughts. That's why every morning when I get up, the first thing I do is gratitude prayer, because I put positive thought in my head. And like you said, when you're driving to work and someone cut you off, it doesn't affect me that much anymore because I'm able to detach from it. Because
right.
and I love that, how do I do that in spirit of love. Thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing message to everyone will be listening to this particular episode. I think for this particular episode, we talk about the frost framework, the good and evil strategy. They're amazing. How you pivoted and how you took emotion out of the situation, and how you ground yourself with love. If we have three takeaway for the audience who's listening to us today, what would those be?
I think first of all, you can't change anybody but yourself. If the world is treating you unkindly, it's on you. Everything is you, right? You got to figure you out. And so it's more important than, I think too many of us try to change the world to meet our needs, as opposed to changing ourselves to just become our very best and then pour that into the world. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's going to be hard. We're going to face challenges. If you think this life is designed, or you're trying to create a world where you don't have challenges, you're going to fail miserably every time. You're going to have challenges. It's the way the world is set up. And so why not get the good stuff? If it's going to be hard, get knowledge, get education, get growth, get the good stuff, because you don't want to get bitter and frustrated and
Mm,
angry, right? That's going to hurt
yeah.
you long term. And the third thing is, as you are able to start taking 100% responsibility for your life and a whole lot of grace for your life,
Yeah.
you can start to spread joy no matter what challenge you're facing. And it's a beautiful thing. I am surrounded in my life by happiness and joy and love. And I live in the same world that everybody else does. I go the same places, but it uplifts me, and it's a powerful thing for me to see and to feel that way. And I would promise you that if you can take responsibility for yourself and take 100% accountability, get the good stuff, give yourself a lot of grace, you're gonna be surrounded by love and happiness and joy too. And that's my hope for everyone listening today.
Thank you, Kyle, for sharing that the three takeaway. Can you share with the audience what project are you working on? If they want to reach out to you, how do they reach out to you?
So you can catch up with me on my Facebook page. It's Kyle Jetzel. You see my name right there. Just look me up on Facebook and connect that way. I also have a program where I teach parents raising strong-willed kids.
Yeah.
I teach, and I use the same frameworks, right? And it's a really powerful thing. Way too many parents find themselves overwhelmed and trapped, and they feel like they're in survival mode. And I teach parents how to get out of survival mode and into thriving mode.
Mm,
And what ends up happening is we don't want to. Strong-willed kids are good. We don't want to beat the strong will out of them. We want to just help aim them, and we can do that in a spirit of love, and they'll respond to discipline in a spirit of love. Kids don't respond to discipline, but they do respond to discipline in a spirit of love. And my family is an example of that situation, and the love we have in our home, even though they challenge me every day. And they're always going to. That's what I do now is I teach parents how to love their kids and guide them and really start to thrive as a family as they raise these strong-willed kids.
I want to thank you, Kyle, for coming to my podcast today and sharing your gifts to the world. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.